leadership, the ability to translate vision into reality, the talent of bringing a number of individuals together to work for a common cause. History is a witness that testifies this. Every great occurrence in the world has been a result of the relentless efforts of countless individuals who were inspired by the vision of one single individual. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Convo, Team Quantum's very own talk show. I am Himanshu Sharma, the design engineer.
And I'm Bhuvi Pandey, the team manager. In today's interview, we are going to interview a very special guest, an individual with immense experience in the army as well as the corporate world, Captain Raghu Raman.
Good morning, one and all present here. With the blessings of Chauhan ma'am, we, the members of Team Quantum of Amity International School, Sakib, have got this wonderful opportunity to interview Captain Raghu Raman sir, an individual who has held a commendable job profile, whose life experiences and achievements throughout his life continue to inspire many people. We are privileged to have you here with us today, sir, and we welcome you to this interaction. We are also joined by a respected Vice Principal Ma'am, Dr. Alka Saxena Ma'am, and our mentor teacher, Richa Pandey Ma'am. Thank you for joining us today.
So, before we start, we would like to give a brief about us and our objective. We are a team of 6 11th graders participating in F1 in Schools India Open National Finals 2021. In the competition, we have to create a miniature F1 car that runs with the help of compressed air cylinder and race the same with the cars that are made by other teams from Pan India. The factors that make F1 in schools stand out from other competition is that it not only initiates STEM learning, but also it enhances our marketing, designing, leadership, and innovation skills. It gives us a plethora of opportunities to experiment, innovate, establish our own team identity, and become better individuals altogether. As a part of the competition, we have taken this initiative to interview experts from different fields, such that we, as well as our audience, can learn from their experiences. So, without any further ado, let's start with today's session. Captain Raghu Raman sir has experience in both corporate environment and the army. His words of wisdom encouraged many, from writing a book to being a UN peacekeeper to leading national intelligence grid. Sir has left no stone unturned in utilizing his potential. An individual with dynamic leadership skills, Sir's words of wisdom are certain to help us further in our endeavors.
Uh, so, if we have your permission, shall we start?
Of course, you may begin. Please. Thank you.
Sure, sir. So, sir, before we start, let's just go back to the initial days of your career. So, how did you decide that you wanted to join the armed forces? Like, was there any or any other motivating factor that helped you decide that this is the field you want to be in?
I wish I had a very noble and a great answer. Like I had always wanted to serve the country and all, but actually the truth was that when we were growing up, there weren't that many professional choices. You could either join the government or the private sector. And honestly speaking, in school, I used to get into a lot of trouble. And at least in school, I was not very good in academics. And most of the teachers used to just say that फौज में चले जाओ. There you don't have to study too much, which is wrong, which we discovered only after we joined the army. But it was more, I think, at that point of time, the kids were kind of slotted into professions. There were some who would want to become civil servants, there's some who would want to become engineers, IIT, medical, some would want to become teachers, and some who would want to join the army. So there weren't that many choices, and quite honestly, there wasn't that much of information either. Many of us, I think, apart from those who wanted to get into IIT and the medical colleges, many of us didn't even think about what we wanted to do until we were in 11th or sometimes even in 12th. I think now the pressure is much more to try and figure out what you want to be by the age of 8, 10, 12. But I don't think we had those challenges, and it was more a fait accompli that okay, fine, let's give it a shot, and that's the way. Of course, like most boys and girls, of course, there is a charm of joining the armed forces, wearing a uniform, riding a tank, doing those kind of things. And like most professions, after you join, you discover it's not all of that. It's not all fun, and there is a lot of work behind it. And in any profession, what you see from the outside and what really happens in the inside, there is less than 40% of, I think, similarities. But the trick is to find something in which you are happy about that 40%. So for me, it was the army. That's how I kind of got into the army.
Yes, sir. So we completely agree. The reality is often different from what we perceive it to be. So, um, based on your experience, would you say that military training can be or should be incorporated in our education system in India? I mean, we have NCC where candidates can join voluntarily, but do you think youngsters should be given this exposure to this regime so that they are psychologically, physically, and are emotionally strong?
This is a very popular question. And I think personally, I believe it's a question that a lot of people want to gas about because it is a gassy question, which means by gassy, which means this question sounds very high flying and all of that, but actually nobody wants to do it because my argument is very simple. If people believe that young people should get military training, then why don't they join the NCC? Why is NCC dying out from all the urban schools? All urban schools, rural schools still have them, but all urban schools, the NCC is dying away. So very clearly, whether it needs to be driven by the parents or by the children. Many times, some of my friends in a party will comment that, don't you think 2 years of compulsory military service should be there for every young person? I don't think so. And not just me, but most democracies in the world don't have conscripted service. And there's a reason for that. It takes a long time for the army, any army of the world, to train a soldier proficient enough for that soldier to become effective. It's not, you can't, you may give a training of about 18 months, but then there needs to be battle experience, there needs to be operational experience. So a soldier kind of gets seasoned. It takes some time to season. And 2 years is not enough time to do that. Secondly, I don't think any army in the world wants a tourist army. Every army wants people who are coming in voluntarily and who want to sort of do what it takes, not because they've been compelled to come. And third is, I think a lot of people who suggest this idea suggest it not from a national defense point of view. They suggest it so that the youth will be better groomed. You know, the youth will become more disciplined. So the Indian Armed Forces is not some charter coaching classes where the society should send their indisciplined youngsters to get disciplined. This is something that parents should be doing, something that homes should be doing, something that schools should be doing. If they have not been able to do that in 16 years and they think like any problem which can't be solved is handed over to the Indian Army, so this problem also should be given to the Indian Army, I think it's a very silly way of looking at it. And for all the people who talk about this question, I ask them the simple question that why don't you send your kids to NCC? Then they will tell me, no, actually my kids are okay. It's the neighbor's kid who needs to be disciplined. So life doesn't work that way. So no, I think the short answer is there are enough instruments out there for this country's youth to be learning the skills of team building and many other things that are taught in the armed forces. And the NCC is a very strong instrument, and NCC is a very vibrant organization in the rural areas and tier 2, tier 3 cities. Unfortunately, in tier 1 cities, where a lot of idealistic talk happens, NCC is actually dying there.
Yes, sir, we completely agree. In even our school, we don't have NCC, but we have. Our chairperson came up with this idea of ACC, Amity Cadet Corps, and we were given some military exposure for a short period of time. And maybe that's the point where I made my mind that this is the regimentation and the discipline. They all appeal to me very much.
So we also have our principal.
Sorry?
Good morning. Morning, Captain Raghuraman.
Morning, ma'am. How are you?
I'm fine. I was in fact on my way to school, so I got a little late in joining. But thank you very much for being there and helping the children out. And
Not at
yes,
all, ma'am.
we try and have a little bit of regimentation in our school as well. And I'm also from the forces background, so thank you very much for joining in to help them out. You can
Anytime,
continue,
ma'am.
children.
Anytime.
There's lots of disturbance on the way. So, yeah, just continue. Thank you so much once again.
So,
Thank you very
ma'am,
much.
Yeah.
just as an anecdote, I'm very scared of principals for two reasons. One, of course, I'm scared of principals because this is the first time actually principal is coming late to class. Normally, I'm the one who's always late to class. So that is making me happy. And the other reason is my mother was the principal of DTE, Lodi Road. You might know it. It's a school in Delhi. So she was the principal there. So I had a principal at home also.
So,
Please go ahead.
fine. A person with a principal at home must be very principled in life.
It doesn't usually turn out that way.
Yeah, I have two sons who had an army officer father and a principal for a mother. I know what
There you
it's like.
go.
So, yeah, please continue. Children, continue.
Yes,
Go ahead.
yes, ma'am. So, following up the question we asked earlier, when you decided that you wanted to join the army, were your expectations similar to what you had imagined how military life would be?
Yes and no. Of course, everyone does a little bit of research before you join any profession. And yes, one had family friends who were in the army. But like any other profession, like I said earlier, what you have is only, it's like an elephant. No? You catch the tail, you catch the leg, you catch the ear, you have very different opinion. But once you join, you see the whole beast in its entirety. And it's not necessarily, it's, in many places, it surprises you pleasantly. You wouldn't have expected, oh my God, I didn't expect this to happen, and that may be amazing. And also remember, whenever you join any organization, in every organization, there are, in the same army, there will be the armored corps, there will be infantry, there will be engineers, there will be paratroopers, and their life will be extraordinarily different. Certain segments that happens in corporates as well. The people who go into finance and accounts, their life is very different from those who go into sales, regardless of which organization they go into. So they may go into Unilever, they may go into Reliance, but what sales will do will be very different from what finance will do, from what HR will do. So these there is no such thing as saying, okay, this is what I expect will happen, and that's what should happen. And it's a mistake to think that way, because before you see something, you are in no position to make a judgment whether it makes you happy or not. Right? Like, let's say you're going to a new country which you have never visited before, never ever visited before. So rather than, of course, there's some guidance that I'll land in Paris and then maybe I'll go to Normandy, or maybe I'll go here, I'll see this, I'll see this. But you should not go. Okay, I'll give you an easier example to understand. When you go to a forest like Jim Corbett, some of you may have gone also to Jim Corbett or Bandhavgarh or whatever. Now, if you go with a mindset that I have to see a tiger, let's say you're there for 3 days and you don't see a tiger, you will come back unhappy. But for 3 days, you were in a jungle. There were so many other species. There was a bear, there were hyenas, there were footprints that you saw. You lived in the proximity of a tiger. That entire experience, because you decided that unless I see a tiger, it is not a good experience. It's a wrong way of experiencing life. So when you look at a profession, you say, will I be happy there? Will I be able to contribute? Will I make, most importantly, will I learn? Will I constantly keep learning? And because when you learn, you grow as a person. We don't have much control over our height and the way we look. We have some control over the way we can build our body, and we can, become bodybuilders or whatever. Some of these boys do this 6-pack and all of that bullshit. or we can be healthy. But one thing on which there is no limit is we can continue to learn and decide your metrics of saying this is my expectation and did I get my expectation based on that, not based on some metrics which you're not even aware of whether that metric is important or not.
Yes, sir, we completely agree. So now moving on to the next question, just kind of relating to the current times. During the pandemic, besides the upsurge in the COVID cases, there was also a constant rise of mental health issues. People were and are still not able to cope up with the changing times. Did military training incorporate values that have, in a way, helped you during these tough times?
I think training in resilience is not the prerogative only of the military service. There's no doubt about that. I mean, let's take a look around us. I think all of us who are on this webinar call are extraordinarily blessed. But immediately in our own circles, some of you may have drivers at home, some of you may have maids who are working at home. Your school has a lot of housekeeping staff which cleans up the floor and all of those things. Now, all of these people, they exist in a salary band of about 15 to 18,000 rupees. That's the salary band. And yet they come to the school before you. They probably leave the school after you. They also have 2 children who they have to bring up. They have to feed those children. One dengue in the family will wipe out 6 months of their savings. So resilience is the ability to withstand the punches of life. And that, of course, military trains you to do that very, very well. But many people have that training. If you just look around you, you will find that there are many, many people who have that training. So for every person who says, oh, I don't know how we'll concentrate today, there is no AC is not working today. There are millions of people who sleep on the road during the summer and they have flies on their face and vehicles passing by. You've seen them all. So resilience is not, as I say, the prerogative of any one profession. Resilience is actually a state of mind. And one of the things which I would like to warn you about is a warning that most of us have been brought up in a fairly protected environment. And most of us have been living a life, I mean, from whatever which school you are in and the kind of forums you are participating in, we have been living a life that has usually consisted of good, better, good, better, good. You haven't dealt with punches in your life so far. And if you haven't dealt with punches, the first punch that hits you hard has the ability to take you out completely. So I think even in your own level, you should start doing some things to improve your resilience. One of the ways to improve it is to actually be more participative in the lives of those who are less privileged than us, those who are much poorer than us, understanding how they manage to live within 15 to 20,000 rupees, talking to them, asking questions like, "Ghar mein kitna ration aata hai? Kaun sa chawal aata hai? Kitni sabzi?" Understanding how they try to manage in that, because that will at least give you a sense of gratitude. Next time you discuss an iPhone, whatever, 11, 12, you should be aware that that's probably annual salary of one of these housekeeping people. And that one instrument can actually transform the life of one of his children in terms of scholarship for an entire year and stuff like that. So I think it's important to have a sense of that. It's also important to, I think, dirty your hands and actually work. I'm not saying some fancy SUPWD which is organized by the school. I'm meaning actual grassroots. I mean, if you don't know the names of the people who work at your place, their wives, their children, if you don't know in the colonies where you live, the societies where you live, the names and details of the press wali who is doing your ironing, or the milkman who is fetching milk for you, or I don't think you are either learning to be resilient or becoming a leader. So I think because we are born in a privileged environment, we will have this disadvantage that we'll have to teach ourselves resilience. Nobody else will teach us that. You will not go hungry for 4 days. Not possible. I mean, you may go on a diet, but you will not go hungry. You will never be poor. Your parents may not give you money, but you know in your head you are not poor, because if any emergency happens, they will step in. Now, when you live in that kind of a mindset, the first time when no one steps in, you will collapse. So I think, yes, military training does help, but like I said, this training is not the prerogative only of the military. And the second point is, I think we must train ourselves in resilience, because no one else will help you in that space. Everyone will be out there to protect you, at least now.
Yes, sir. We are
Yes,
very
and
privileged
it's
to.
indeed rightly said um, that instead of questioning the chaos, you have to embrace the chaos. And following that up, we know that change is always a big part of our life. So, after your experience of serving 12 years in the Indian Army, how was it like in the early days of when you changed fields from the army to the corporate sector?
So it's again, these are things that happen to people in life all the time. Like those of you who are in class 12 are today, fanne khan in the school. But when you'll go to college, you'll again be a fresher who will be ragged all over again. And then by the time you finish your college, again you'll be fanne khan the sixth semester, and then you'll join a job where you'll be treated like a flunky, the latest flunky. So this cycle happens throughout in your life. And yes, joining from the army into a different world was a very big challenge. It was almost like resettling into another country where you didn't understand the language, you didn't understand which side of the road they do. Everything was new. But that is the interesting part about life, that you constantly are learning new stuff. And it's just like, suppose you had an opportunity to go and live in Sweden for 6 months, or go and live in Bangalore for 6 months. Which one will teach you more? So it's very clear that when you change your entire circumstances and operating systems, you tend to learn far, far more. And by definition, therefore, you grow far more. So yeah, it was a challenge, but it was a lot of fun.
Thank you, sir. Listening to your experiences from your early days in military and the transition into the corporate world was indeed inspiring. Now, besides contributing immensely in various aspects of the forces, you have also been a great leader in the corporate world. So moving forward, we'd like to gain certain advice from you in terms of leadership and its application in the corporate world, as well as our day-to-day lives. So you have been a part of you have been in a leadership position in Indian Army, as well as in numerous companies you have worked in. Do you think that the qualities of a leader differ from sector to sector, or are the qualities same throughout all the sectors?
I think the core principles of leadership remain the same. It's like all matter is made up of atoms and electrons and protons and stuff. Everything that happens in this world is governed by some law of physics, whether it's quantum physics or Newtonian physics or whatever. There are mathematical algorithms which are the underlying principle of everything in mathematics. Similarly, in leadership, there are some core principles, and these are universally core, whether it's the military, whether it's the corporate, whether it's at home, whether it's a leadership of a small team, whether it's the relationship between a teacher and a student, all of it. The core principles remain the same. 4 or 5 principles, I think. The first principle is that the leader must acknowledge that she has to have higher accountability, must have to work harder or at least as equal as the hardest member of the team, must have the capacity to take on more worries, more stress, and also sometimes more failure than any other member of the team. The second quality is that the leader has to earn that position at some point of time. I mean, you will be in your life, everything going well, you will go to some Ivy League college, you will get first day selection, you will join a company where they'll say this is a young management trainee who has come to us from IIM. You will get into the organization, but then you will have to earn that position within the organization by your work, because at the end of the day, people, your colleagues, your subordinates have to look at you and say, ah, yaar, banda acha hai, kaam karta hai, person is good. That is the final ratification. You can tell them I was in MET, I have done this, I have done that. They care a jack shit about it, because that is only an entry ticket into the organization. So that principle that the leader has to prove her competency again and again and again is the second principle of leadership. Third is you genuinely have to care about your troops. You genuinely need to care about. You can't say one thing to them and do another thing. It's very, very obvious. I know your vice principal is sitting here, but that is very obvious in a school also. Every student, dil ke andar wale dil mein, knows who is the teacher who cares about the student and who doesn't care. No matter how good the person may try to be, because who do you discuss all the time in school? You discuss the teachers. Similarly, when you will become a leader, who will your subordinates discuss all the time? They'll discuss you. So every behavior of yours, every manner of yours is being watched all the time, and therefore you will have to do whatever you're doing with them to some extent of genuineness, because you can't fake it in front of them. So caring for the people and being genuinely interested in their well-being doesn't mean you have to mollycoddle them. Some of the best teachers you have hammer you the hardest, but many years later you will say, "Ah, yaar, maths to usne sikhaya tha mere ko, badi hell." Not the one who said, "Oh, today is free period and today let's have a, yes, that's needed once in a while, but you know what I'm getting at." So very clearly, caring for the troops and being genuinely interested in their success, and obviously having to constantly reinvent the organization and therefore reinvent themselves and therefore be a constant learner. I think these five elements of leadership are common in any environment. Of course, their manifestation may be different. The manifestation will be, if you're in the army, the constant learning happens as a part of the structured program, training programs, and all of that which the army conducts. If you're joining, let's say, the teaching profession, then as ma'am will tell you, teachers also have to go for their workshops and all of that. And some of them will have to do it on their own. There are many teachers who will want to do it on their own and say, okay, I have become a B.Ed, now I want to become an M.Ed, or I want to go to the next level and the next level. So I think the manifestations of these leadership elements may be different in different organizations, but the core principles of leadership are the same.
Thank you so much, sir, for those insightful thoughts. We are certain that these will help us improve our efficiency, not only in this competition, but also beyond that. Moving further to the next question, which is again related to leadership. Now, leadership is sometimes perceived as a natural and inherent capability of an individual that cannot be learned as such. So, do you think this is true? What will be your opinions on this very common saying?
This is pure bullshit, and I don't know why it is propagated. I think it's propagated by a few people who want to. Well, let's put it this way. I'm going to give you a very simple dichotomic definition. What is the first job of a leader? The first job of a leader is to improve the people under him. The first job of a teacher is to improve the caliber of the student. The first job of a parent is to ensure that the child becomes better. So how can a leader, let's assume the CEO or a teacher or a parent, improve a student, a child, or a subordinate if the assumption is that the subordinate cannot learn leadership, or the student cannot learn how to lead, or the child cannot learn how to lead? Then the whole theory falls flat. Then why are we having leadership as a concept? Because by definition, you say either you are born with it or not born with it, right? So, for example, I'm just making it ridiculously simple to put this point across, the ridiculousness of this point. Either you are born a male or a female, majority, right? So let's say I'm born a male. No matter how much of training I get, know how to become a female, how to become, I cannot become, no? So if you say a quality is an innate quality with which you are born, then by definition you cannot change it. So what is the big purpose of having schools and engineering colleges and all of that if the presumption is that you can't teach leadership? So this is pure crap. Leadership can be learnt at every level, at every stage. Which is the most difficult person to lead? Who is the most difficult person to lead?
So I believe the ones who are immature, the youngsters perhaps, who are not
Someone who
able
is
to
No, I'm
control themselves.
asking you, Bhumi. Your name is Bhumi, right? Who is the most difficult individual to lead?
That varies from person to person perhaps. Certain people are more capable.
Actually, the most difficult person to lead is yourself, for you to lead yourself,
Okay.
right? 4 million people who die of cancer every year know that smoking is bad for them. They're educated, they know it. Hundreds of youngsters you see on the road who drive a two-wheeler without wearing a helmet, they know that driving without a helmet is dangerous. Every kid who tries a drag in the school knows that this is the first stepping stone to doing something which can end up in trouble. Every child who decides, okay, I'll have a shot in a party, knows that so knowledge is not the issue. Leadership is the issue because one part of your head is saying, don't do it. The other part is, yeah, do it, do it, do it. This constant battle is the biggest battle of leadership. So if you are unable to grow as a leader, how if leadership was an innate trait that either you have it or you don't have it, then how would you be able to lead yourself also? You also constantly keep changing, no? So this is complete crap. You should not waste a single second on this theory from today till the rest of your life. This is an excuse of pathetic leaders to say that no, either you're born with it or you're not. Then mera zindagi khatam ho gaya na. Then I don't have to worry. Suppose I came into a class and I said, I'm going to be a teacher and I will write on the board and you copy. And either you are gifted or you are not gifted. So my job is over. I don't have to do anything anymore. So this theory's propagator is probably a lazy, insecure, and an incompetent person because no competent person will ever say that leadership is an innate. Of course, like any trait, some people may have a flair for it. Some people may work hard at developing a flair for it. I'll give you an example. There is a friend of mine who has an incredible ability to remember people's names. Right? Incredible. You meet the person once, he'll remember the name for any, address you with your name anywhere, like, and somehow that is a very strong leadership quality that that person has. But I also know another person who realizes the importance of that and trains himself on names. He actually has the cards with one side the photo of the employee, the other side the name of the employee. Every day he memorizes 100 of them and revises 20 of the previous day. So he knows the importance of this quality. One of my friends has a flair for it. The other one has to work hard at it. But neither of them can say, oh, you're either born with it or not. I don't think that's an argument.
Indeed, sir. I'm sure that people who underestimate their own leadership skills and have a sense of self-doubt will be motivated by your words to improve their skills and build confidence. Now, coming to the next question, it is common understanding that the Indian forces, with their strict regimentation, produce individuals that have imbibed the spirit of discipline in themselves. Did your initial experiences in the Indian Armed Forces give you an edge in some way when you were starting out your venture in the corporate world and enabled you to lead various organizations?
Of course, I mean, there are immense learnings from the armed forces which stand in good stead in any career, any profession, corporate or anything. I think I've done a couple of detailed talks on that, so I don't want to repeat what I've said there over here. But the first principles of leadership, problem solving, communication, working under stress, working with completely new people. When we are in the UN, we are working with multicultures, diversity, working with different troops. Khalsa officers will get commissioned into Madras battalions. South Indian officers may go to lead Jat regiments, having to adapt to their culture. These are all very, very fungible skills. These skills once learned, it's a bit like if you have learned how to play basketball really, really well, you can play volleyball also pretty okay. You can play Water polo, pretty okay. You'll play any sport, you'll be pretty good at it because your stamina will be good, your eye-hand coordination will be good, your ability to work with a team will be good. So these are fungible skills, and of course, any profession which trains you on these skills. You need to know this, that the Indian Armed Forces probably is the only organization in the world, I mean, not the Indian Army, most armies of the world, which spend close to 90% of their time in training. They're training constantly. So when you train constantly, you actually become, your fungible skills become very strong. They become fundamental. So yeah, I think I strongly would recommend all young leaders to consider a career in the armed forces for a few years because that will equip them for life. You will be equipped for life.
Yes, sir, we completely agree. The Indian forces are one of those institutions in the country and even the world which really help in the overall development of a particular individual by their strict regimentation and the training that is given to them, as you mentioned. Following up on that, time management is believed to be an essential life skill. Do you think that your time in the armed forces was able to help you in inculcating time management skills? And could you also please tell some of the important ways to manage our time efficiently?
So let me show you a good example here by answering this question in one line. Please read a book called Deep Work. Deep Work. It's by Cal Newport. And if you go on YouTube, you'll also find links of his talks. He talks about the importance of deep and focused work. And I would strongly recommend another book called The Shallows. The Shallows. It's written by Nicholas Carr. And both these two books should be essential reading for you, and the school actually should be included in the syllabus because it teaches you not just the importance of time management, it also teaches you the importance of focused concentration. So in the interest of answering this question in good time management, that's all I want to tell you. Read these two books.
Thank you, sir, for recommending those books. So now, can you tell which qualities break or make a particular organization or a group of individuals working as a team? And what is the role of a leader in keeping the people of a particular organization together in order to deal with difficult circumstances which might break the organization?
In an ideal world, an organization's team members should be focused on the organization goals and not on their personal goals. We don't live in an ideal world. In an ideal world, you should be delighted if your best friend beats you in a competition. But in the real world, you will not be delighted. In an ideal world, all of you know that you are competing with each other, but you will have deep camaraderie. In the real world, when a push comes to a shove, many times it won't happen. So there is a delta between the real world and the ideal world. I think the leader's job is to bridge that delta as much as possible. You'll never ever be able to make it completely ideal, but during certain circumstances, people will go beyond the call of duty. During a time when one of your teammates or classmates is really sick, you will go to her house and say, "No, we'll help you prepare for the exam," at a cost of knowing that this might divert you away from, maybe your own parents are telling you, "Why are you wasting time with this student? She's way worse than you," and all. So no, she's my friend and that's why I'll help her and all of that. So all humans have two sides. They have an idealistic side and they have a not so idealistic side, a very parochial side, a very narrow-minded side. I think the job of leaders is to pull out the idealistic side because it's already there. It's already there in most people, and give them a sense of purpose, which causes them to bring out their idealistic, ambitious, big thinking side rather than the petty, parochial, what's in it for me side. That's the fundamental job of a leader. And that's the fundamental quality which makes or breaks an organization.
Thank you so much, sir. We will certainly keep that in mind from now on and try to improve the idealistic side of our personality rather than being narrow-minded beings who work for their own comfort or for their own benefit. Moving forward to the last question, you being an individual having served in the army as well as the corporate world will have a fairly good idea about the skill sets that will help our country in the future. What, according to you, are the essential qualities that are required in the coming generation, which can be useful for our country and propel it towards the path of development?
I think there are three qualities which the next generation, if they have, things that come to my mind, if they have, it will be good for the country, and by extension, good for the youngsters and the individual at a individual level also. The first is, of course, to have a skill of learning fast, but not just as an individual. You have to learn how to learn and how to teach people. Because you may be privileged to have a very good education, an Ivy League education, but when you will start your new startup and you will hire people there, and let's say you start the new Swiggy, and if you have to teach those people about hygiene, people who have not had a basic education, who are living in slums throughout their life, who never had filtered water and all of these fancy things, to teach them hygiene is extremely difficult. So first, I think a quality that all youngsters need to have today is to understand that your own learning is not going to be sufficient to take the country ahead. You will have to make that learning in the entire ecosystem with your brothers and sisters who are far, far less privileged than you. So that sense of awareness कि मैंने सिर्फ मतलब Ivy League में IIM में किसी तरीके से घुस के IIT join करना है, not that way of thinking, but how many of people, my servants' kids, my drivers' kids, my people who come to work in my house, their kids, can I take them also and make them do an orbit shift by doing better? Because after all, you will need them when you are becoming leaders. You need intelligent and educated troops. How will you have intelligent and educated troops if your counterparts in lower financial strata are not having the same or at least similar advantages? So learning and growing with a sense of empathy that we all need to do it together. The second is a sense of empathy. And by empathy, I don't mean if someone falls down, you will pick them up or you will give donation in the time of cyclone and flood and all of that shit. That's not empathy. That is hypocrisy. Empathy is when you genuinely try to understand another culture, another person's point of view, another language. I often ask this when I speak to students, that suppose you had to learn one language other than your mother tongue, English and Hindi, what would that language be? Let me ask you that question. What do you think that language should be?
It should be a regional language. Though I
Yes.
have seen your talk, that's why.
Yeah, so you see, it should be a language that will enable you to interact with your own country people far, far better. Right? If you are going to work in Reliance, if you know Gujarati, your efficiency will be 10x. If you are going to spend your career in Mumbai, if you speak Marathi, your life will be 10x. If you speak to a waiter in a restaurant in Marathi, he'll tell you don't eat the bansi khana hai, because he'll connect with you. Right? So French, see, किसको impress करोगे भाई? ठीक है, जिसको फ्रांस जाना है, वो वहां जाकर सीख लेगा. What's the big deal in that? So one sec, just give me a sec. I'm good. Don't worry about it. No worries. So no, it's all right. So yeah. So the when I say empathy, I mean that empathy of learning. So if you heard that talk, I talk about it. I'm reiterating there. You must have lateral learning, which means understand other cultures, understand your classmates from different areas of India, different religions. Go live in their house for a couple of days, eat the food that they eat, go on a vacation with them, go to their village, see the Northeast, go understand that. The second is vertical integration, where you actually need to understand how people who are less fortunate than us are living. What are they doing? How do they manage? What's entertainment for them? And you learn a very important lesson there. You learn a very important lesson that happiness and money have nothing to do with each other. You can find more happiness in a small 1-by-1 bedroom chal room than you can find in the biggest bungalow with 500 rooms. Happiness has nothing to do with that. So I think those elements are the second aspect that I think the youth should learn. And I genuinely believe that Your generation has to understand the huge cost of divisiveness. A divisive society cannot progress. And if the society cannot progress, no matter how well you do in your exam or how well you do in your education, you will not progress. Sure, you can run away out of India, you can get a good job or something and go away and live in New Zealand or something, but then that's not the answer for the next generation. The next generation has to fix this place. And fixing this place means that realizing that when resources reduce, conflict will increase. When resources reduce and contenders increase, conflict is certain. I'll give you an example. I'm sure you must have gone with your parents for some, lunch or dinner with other parents or other friends, parents' friends. And when the bill came in the restaurant, you must have seen your parents jumping up. No, I'll pay. Because there is abundance. Those same parents were hiding hand sanitizers and toilet rolls. When the neighbor came and asked, can I, we just finished it. Why? Because that time resources were less. You are going to enter, same people, same good father and good mother who was happy to share when there was abundance is now holding very carefully when there is frugality. You are going to grow up in a world where there will be frugality, shortage of pretty much everything. There will be shortage of water, there will be shortage of power, there will be shortage of living space, there will be shortage of money, there will be shortage of food. Now, unless you are able to create a world, gated colonies will not protect you forever. Let's be clear on that. And remember, the people who are guarding the gates of the gated colony, they belong to the side outside the gate. So you are relying on a 15,000 rupee guy to stop you from millions of his brothers and sisters who are starving entering those gates. That won't work for long. So your generation will have to realize that unless we take a far more inclusive view of everything that we do, everything, you will end up in a very tough world where you would have painted yourself into a corner. Sometimes when people are painting a floor, they forget that they are heading towards a corner and they keep painting. And then suddenly they look at the paint and say, how the hell am I going to get out of this? So don't paint yourself into a corner. Your preceding generations have already done a lot of service in that direction. If you see in the last 20 odd years, there has been a huge amount of concentration of wealth to a very tiny minority of this country. You fortunately belong to that minority. But unless you understand that this state of affairs cannot continue, eventually you might end up paying the price for it. By you, I mean this generation. So thanks a ton for this opportunity. It was great fun talking to you. And maybe someday when things are better, we should have a face-to-face.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for those knowledgeable and enhancing answers. I find it very commendable personally and also stimulating that a single individual can do so much in their lives and achieve so much. All your teachings, advice, and stories are certain to help us in our future. It made us realize that if one has the zeal to do something, hindrances in the path do not matter much. We will definitely try to implement.